Hope you're fired up for some mixed martial arts action here on Lit Sports Online. We got Pat on the set again. The first thing we want to do is review UFC 230 that was in Madison Square Garden. So let's start there. Now, there's a couple fights we want to talk about here. We'll start from the bottom, make our way up to the main event. How about Israel Adesanya against Derek Brunson? Israel remaining undefeated. What a fight.
Yeah, it was kind of what I was expecting in a way, and what I was talking about in the preview video is Derek Brunson came forward and was his typical kind of aggressive self. He was a little more reserved than we saw him against, say, Robert Whittaker. I think he probably learned from that Robert Whittaker fight. He kind of rushed in and got knocked out. But Israel Adesanya put on a clinic. He looked phenomenal. He looked kind of like, I guess the closest comparison is, say, like vintage Anderson Silva. He just had a mastery of range. He picked his shots really well. He's not one of those guys who kind of throws bombs and hopes they're going to land. As he says, he aims and fires or something like that. He's precision striking at its best, and he proved why a high-level kickboxing aficionado and expert can transition into MMA if they develop a really good takedown defense, because that's what he has. He's brilliant at stopping a takedown, and his striking is second to almost no one else in the division.
I mean, well, why not? I mean, we've seen a couple guys transition into MMA from kickboxing. Wasn't there that Mirko Cro Cop is one that comes to mind, right? I mean, he was a big-time kickboxer. I mean, here's the thing, though, is like, here's another guy that's coming in undefeated, right? But how's he going to perform against top-tier competition? Like, if he gets a title fight or a contender fight?
That's a very good question. So that's where he's going to next. From Derek Brunson, there's nowhere to go except for the top, like, 5 guys in the division. He's going to get put against a Jacare Souza or Yoel Romero or a Luke Rockhold. And I think Luke Rockhold, out of all of those guys, I think Luke Rockhold is the hardest matchup for him, because Luke Rockhold also has a very, very good striking game. He likes to throw from range. He has very good kicks. He's a real tall guy, and he's a bigger guy than Israel Adesanya, which is what he's going to come up against, I think, with a lot of those guys in the top 5, especially maybe not the champion, but as he gets towards the top of the division, most of those guys are going to be bigger than he is. And he's a real tall guy, but he's kind of real skinny, and he's not. He doesn't appear outwardly, at least, and we haven't seen him show much in the way of having as much raw strength and power as some of the guys towards the top of the division. And so I don't know who he's going to get matched up with. I know a couple of guys that I would like to see. Like I said earlier, I would love to see him versus Luke Rockhold. Even if he goes up against the champ, Robert Whittaker, they're both phenomenal strikers, completely different striking styles, but I think that would be a very, very fun matchup to see.
Well, it's going to be real interesting to see if Adesanya is truly a rising star in UFC, or if he's going to take his first professional mixed martial arts loss. We're going to have to see what happens going from here, but he's going to face probably some tougher competition going forward. Well, it's going to be exciting to see how he performs in that.
Definitely.
Now, we also have the matchup of David Branch against Jared Cannonier, and Cannonier was the winner. So what can you tell us about this one?
I was very wrong about this one, is what I can tell you. I talked a lot about David Branch. I love David Branch. He's a phenomenal fighter. He's a Renzo Gracie black belt. He's a great striker. He has power in his hands. But Cannonier came down from the light heavyweight division and had about as good of a division debut as you could possibly hope for. He beat a top, I think 7 guy. I can't remember exactly where David Branch was ranked at the time, but his last fight was against Luke Rockhold, who's one of the kind of perennial top contender guys. So I think that Cannonier found his new weight class. I think he should stay here. I think he's going to do phenomenally, and he's kind of in a similar position to Adesanya. He just beat one of the guys who's on the cusp of the top 5, and now I think they're going to give him a top 5, 7 guy and see how he fares. And if he comes out and finishes one of the guys towards the top of the division, I wouldn't be surprised to see him being talked about in title contention relatively quickly as well.
Okay, well, there's the story in that one. A perfect transition to a new weight class, something you don't often see. On his debut, really making some noise. Next, we got Chris Weidman versus Jacare Souza, where Souza got the win, and this was another one that kind of didn't go how you expected, right?
No, not at all. Chris Weidman is one of those guys who a lot of people think is the best middleweight in the world. On any given night, he could beat anyone in the division, without a doubt. But we're now looking at a position where a former champion, the guy who took out arguably the greatest fighter of all time, twice in a row, Anderson Silva, is now looking at 4 out of his last 5 fights being losses.
Oh, that's
and a
brutal.
couple of them, and a couple of them being finishes. And it's not a position you expect a guy like Chris Weidman to be in. And that being said, I don't want to take away from Jacare's performance, but Chris Weidman looked great in the fight. His striking looked great. He was controlling the stand-up game for the most part. He was landing from all sorts of angles. His striking game looked more varied than it normally does. His head movement looked better than it normally does. He just got caught. And it happens. Every fight, everyone has a puncher's chance, especially with those small gloves, and that's what happened. Jacare caught him a little over halfway into the 3rd round of the fight, and it's unfortunate, for Weidman, but it's great for Jacare, because Jacare is a guy who had lost a couple that a lot of people thought he would win, and so now Jacare finds himself back in title contention, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them give him the title shot next. But for Chris Weidman, it's a question of what now, and I think it's not too far-fetched to say he might jump up a division, the opposite of Cannonier.
Well, you think any chance he tries to call for a rematch?
It's possible, and I personally would like to see it because it was a good fight, but I don't think it's likely. I think they're more likely to say, okay, this guy's on the way up, and Weidman, like I said, he's lost 4 out of his last 5 fights. So when you're in that position, you're not in the position to be calling many shots. You're kind of going to take what they'll give you, especially if it's going to be another fight with a top 5 guy. I don't think they're going to put him against another top 5 guy. If he stays in the division, they're going to start on the road of building him back up. Because he, like I said, he is, any night could beat anyone in the division. He just hasn't had his night more times than not recently, and so I think they'll have him fight a lower tier guy. I honestly wouldn't be that surprised to see them put him up against Derek Brunson. Both guys coming off a loss to top tier guys makes sense as far as where they're at in their career. So we'll see, but I wouldn't be surprised if he jumped up to light heavyweight as well. I think the matchups for him at light heavyweight, if I'm looking at it, I think there's 2 guys, 3 in the light heavyweight division if you include Daniel Cormier, that are bad matchups for him, but I think he fares very well against, Anthony Smith, Volkan Oezdemir, De Souza, and all those other guys. It's not far-fetched to say that he could make a title run a weight class up.
Okay, and then, of course, the main event of UFC 230 was Daniel Cormier and Derek Lewis, and, this kind of went the way you predicted it, with Cormier winning by submission.
Yeah, I'll take the one win I can get, I called one of them right. It's better than none of them right. It went exactly how I thought it was going to go. It was kind of Daniel Cormier went in there and said, nope, not doing that. I am not going to risk standing here and getting punched by this enormous guy whose nickname is the Black Beast. Hell no. And he went in for the single leg and took him down, controlled him, ground and pounded him, and then got the submission in round 2, which is exactly what I thought was going to happen. And the funny thing is Derek Lewis in the post-fight interview is talking about, he's like, I didn't think that Daniel Cormier was going to focus so much on the single leg takedown game. And I'm like, looking at him like, dude, that's like his main thing. He goes in for the single leg and then he chains different things together and takes people down. And we see him.
Someone wasn't watching enough film.
Yeah, I guess so. It's a weird. That would be the first thing I would look for. So I'm not sure where Derek Lewis is going to go from here, but Daniel Cormier looked great, just as I thought he would, and hopefully for Daniel Cormier now, I know he's planning on retiring soon. He said he was going to retire before he turned 40. He turns 40 in March. My guess is he has 2 more fights in his career, and they're going to be the biggest money fights he could possibly get, and he might only have one of these 2, but he's either going to fight Brock Lesnar or John Jones. Either way, it's a good fight. I think he beats Brock Lesnar. I don't know if I'm that excited for the John Jones trilogy, but it'll make a lot of money.
But do you see Cormier ending his career with a vacated title or by losing the title to somebody?
Depends on which of those 2 fights he takes. So
who's easier for him to beat?
Brock Lesnar.
Kind of makes sense. I mean, he is fucking around the WWE a little too much.
Yeah, and Brock Lesnar, the only evidence you need is to watch the first two Jones-Cormier fights. You know, it's while yes, it's a different weight class, and Cormier does tend to carry more knockout power and things in heavyweight, and he doesn't have to drain himself with the weight cut. The same can be said for John Jones. We don't know how John Jones is going to look at heavyweight when he's allowed to put on a little bit more muscle, which he likes to do in the offseason. We don't know how he's going to look like when he doesn't have to do the weight cut. And John Jones is the best fighter we've ever seen in the cage. So, Cormier versus Brock Lesnar, I think, is the much easier matchup for Cormier. Cormier is an Olympic-level wrestler.
I mean, Lesnar has just been fucking around the WWE for a while, so
yeah,
he's not really.
which is also one of the reasons that Brock Lesnar is so astounding. I was listening to, I think it's the Big Brown Breakdown with Brendan Schaub, or I'm sorry, Below the Belt now, Brendan Schaub's podcast, and he said something along the lines of, it's crazy how successful Brock Lesnar is and has been in MMA, considering it's basically a hobby for him. His career is professional wrestling, and every once in a while he gets bored and goes, I'm going to go get paid to fight. And then he trains for like 2 months and fights top 5 guys and fucking wins. Get the fuck out of here. He's a freak of nature. If he was born in a different century, he would be a Viking king somewhere, pillaging the rest of the world, and nobody could do anything about it. It would be lunacy. But we live in the 21st century where Daniel Cormier has been wrestling since he was able to touch his hands to the ground and put them on another person.
But yet he didn't go to the WWE.
No, because he went to the Olympics instead. He went and actually kept fighting and actually having real combat and real competition against real high-level athletes in a real sport. He's a real fighter. Just saying that, throw a jab at the other video. But Daniel Cormier is phenomenal, and he has, I think the biggest advantage he's going to have is the striking game. Brock Lesnar's biggest advantage over most people is his size, his brute strength, and his wrestling. But Daniel Cormier's wrestling technique is far better than Brock Lesnar's. So unless Brock Lesnar's size and strength are that overwhelming, Daniel Cormier will either be able to keep the fight standing and outstrike him, or take Brock Lesnar down instead of getting taken down. And you can't forget the fact that the worst beating Brock Lesnar ever had was against Cain Velasquez, Daniel Cormier's main training partner. So, everything points to Daniel Cormier beating Brock Lesnar in that matchup for me.
Okay, well, be interesting to see how the career of a Cormier ends, but let's transition over to talking about UFC Denver, which was a very exciting, some exciting matches on Fox Sports 1 for UFC Denver here. You don't always get this grade of competition on a non-pay-per-view card, but we really did this time, so let's talk about it.
Yeah, so the first fight we want to talk about is Donald Cerrone versus Mike Perry, Cowboy, one of the fan favorites. And there was a little bit of a beef here because of their gym. Mike Perry had recently started training at Jackson Winklejohn, which is one of the best gyms in the country. Same gym that John Jones fights out of. Diego Sanchez, Alistair Overeem, Holly Holm, the list, Carlos Condit, the list of top tier fighters that train there can go on forever. And so obviously it attracts people. Mike Perry went there because he didn't have a gym that he was training out of regularly. He started training with Mike Winklejohn, one of the main 2 coaches of the gym, one of the owners. And Donald Cerrone doesn't train with Winklejohn. And since Mike Perry was training at the gym, Donald Cerrone had already decided, I'm not going to use my normal coach and Greg Jackson for this fight because it wouldn't be fair. He talked to Mike Winklejohn about it, and Winklejohn said, hey, it's all good. It'll be a hands-off. You guys can have the fight. We'll all resume training as we normally do afterwards.
Well, what do you mean it wouldn't be fair?
So you can't. It's not right if they're each training with coaches that know the opposite fighter inside and out. You know, normally when you're fighting somebody from a different camp, you're not training with people and with coaches who are also training them to fight you.
Right.
So like it would be a little bit like any coach in any sport just calling each other on the phone like, hey, what's your plan for this shit? My plan is for him to take the other guy down. You're like, well, my plan is for him to stand up. You're like, got it, bro. Mine's going to work perfectly. Like, no, that just, it doesn't make sense. So there's a little bit of a conflict of interest, right? And So then Cerrone got in a whole spat with Mike Winkeljohn, and Winkeljohn started talking about how Cerrone's never around, doesn't actually help any of the other fighters at the gym train. He just poaches people and coaches and takes them up to his ranch called the Bad Motherfucker Ranch out there in New Mexico that he owns, and fucks off and does whatever he wants. And so it became a whole thing. And Cerrone said that he didn't have bad blood with Mike Perry, but Mike Perry was kind of flying the Winkeljohn flag a little bit and kind of bringing that beef in. And it didn't work out very well for him, to say the least. The fight started off standing like we all thought it would, like they were all talking shit, and they all said they were going to just go to the middle of the cage and bang and just throw punches, and it kind of started off that way. Cerrone kind of keeping it at range with some jabs, and then Cerrone faked a takedown, and Mike Perry returned with his own takedown, and Cerrone broke his arm. There was
Ouch.
Yeah, there was a scramble. Mike Perry left his arm out. Cerrone locked it up, threw up an armbar, and broke his arm. And Mike Perry tapped.
So what did Winkeljohn have to say about it?
Winkeljohn made a video afterwards saying, basically, you know, this sport is not only, it's an individual sport, but it's a team effort, and, you know, camps are only as good as the teamwork in the camp, and he wishes Mike Perry didn't take him down, but he actually called Donald Cerrone cancer, and he said in order to keep the body healthy, the body of the camp healthy, you have to cut the cancer out, and now the cancer is removed, so our gym is going to be better for it.
Jeez, talk about playing up some rivalries.
Yeah, sounds a little bitter to me, but he's a hell of a coach, still has a hell of a roster of fighters, and I know that Donald Cerrone and Greg Jackson will still continue to have their relationship and train together, so I think it all kind of works out in the end.
And then moving on to another badass fight that we want to talk about. In fact, the main event of the night, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So you have Chan Sung Young against Yair Rodriguez. Hope I didn't butcher their names, but there's our two fighters, and boy, did this one get really interesting. I mean, it was a really great fight in general, but the way it ended, I mean, I'll let you tell them all about it.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was a really fun striking match. The Chan Sung Jung, the Korean zombie as they call him, in typical Korean zombie fashion, just kind of dead in the face and walks straight at you throwing punches, and Yair Rodriguez and his typical flashy kicks and everything. And at the end of the fight, they hear the 10-second claps, the clapper that they have outside the ring, and they both just kind of went, oh shit, there's 10 seconds left. They looked at each other and just went, high five, bro, this was fun. And then they both just started throwing down, and Korean Zombie threw a couple punches. Rodriguez started to back up. As Rodriguez backed up, Korean Zombie chased him, threw a couple punches. Yair Rodriguez ducked under to avoid the punches and threw a back elbow like crazy and caught Korean Zombie straight on the chin, knocked him out cold in literally the last second of the fight. 4 minutes and 59 seconds of the last 5-minute round of the fight. Winning my friend Joe $180, that son of a bitch. But it was a hell of a finish. It was crazy. It was one of those, like, those moments where it's so crazy that you don't even, like, jump up out of excitement. You just kind of, like, stare at the TV like a deer in the headlights, like, what just happened?
But speaking of your friend Joe, like, I'm half tempted to have you start doing like spread predictions on this MMA stuff over a channel. I mean, win some people some money. Am I right?
Right? Maybe. I mean, it's the thing is like he was asking me for predictions and stuff, and it's just so many possibilities. There's so many possible outcomes that could happen that I have no idea what to pick in those situations.
Right.
I mean, I would if he would have asked me, should I bet $10 on a finish in the 5th round? I'd be like, no, probably not. That's super uncommon. But I would have been fucking wrong. So it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But it was a crazy fight. I think one of the contenders for fight of the year and knockout of the year for sure. It was. I've never seen a knockout like that. The closest thing I've ever seen is John Jones throwing his crazy spinning back elbows in weird situations. But I've never seen anybody duck under a punch and throw an upwards elbow from behind them and catch somebody. Is insane. It's some Matrix shit.
I mean, that's probably something that wouldn't really happen if both the fighters weren't so fatigued, am I right? I mean, you wouldn't see
I mean, fatigue or no fatigue, I think it really just happened because both fighters are such entertaining people to watch because they both were. It's a lot of times it's the last 10 seconds of the fight. I thought Korean Zombie was going to win a decision. I thought he was going to eke out a split decision, 3 rounds to 2. But these guys are so game that the last 10 seconds of the fight came around. And they looked at each other and just went, "You want to do this?" And they're like, "Yep." And they both just threw caution to the wind and threw everything they had for the last 10 seconds of the fight. And it didn't go one of their ways. And sometimes that happens. We saw it a few weeks ago with Derek Brunson versus Alexander Volkov. Derek Brunson lands that one punch. That's what got him the title shot. And shit happens. And while it sucks for one guy, it's spectacular for the other. And that's why this sport is so entertaining.
So where does Rodriguez go from here? Is he got to get a contender, a title shot, maybe get himself a pay-per-view match? What do you think he's got in the store for him?
Personally, I would love to see the matchup that they wanted to make from the get-go with Yair Rodriguez, which is I would like to see him fight Zabit Magomedsharipov, who is a young contender out of Russia who looks like a world beater. He is a crazy striking game. His takedown game or defense is great. His takedown game is great. He's just super well-rounded, looks phenomenal. They tried to make this fight. Magomedsharipov got injured, so the fight fell out. I would love to see them make that fight. It's an even bigger fight now that Rodriguez's star is a little higher, so it's better for both guys because Magomedsharipov is coming up. There's a lot of hype behind him. Rodriguez is now coming off this huge win, so if either guy wins, it makes them look that much better. And I think the winner of that match will then go on to fight a top 7, top 5 guy and find themselves 2 or 3 fights away from a title shot tops. And it could be a really exciting way to take 2 guys that they've been trying to build up for a while and see which one of them is actually going to shine.
All right, well, that's going to do it for our mixed martial arts this week, the UFC 230 and UFC Denver review. Make sure to stay tuned because we're going to have more videos like this coming out. And also, I'm going to plug the website again that we have coming out. This is LitTube.com. It's going to be an actual thing. That's right. We're going to start putting our videos on there, our articles. It's going to be great. So keep an eye out for that as well. Stay tuned. Like, subscribe. Good night.
Hookers, dude. That's what my college was.
Hey, I can get hookers too. They just won't be the clean kind.
Or the attractive kind.
Yeah, or the attractive kind. I bet you think strippers like you too.
What's that from? What was that from?
That's from Forgetting Sarah Marshall.
Yeah, that's right.